All right. Hello, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here with SoMeDocs. What an amazing platform opportunity for physicians to interact with one another. Today, I'm going to be talking about opportunities for career transition to the biopharma industry for physicians. So I'll start with an introduction of myself. My business is the Pharma Industry MD Coach, and I'm Narissa Crayer. The Industry MD Coach is meant to help physicians explore and ultimately find a fulfilling career in the biopharma industry. I utilize both step-by-step guidance through the process, including resume, LinkedIn training, interviewing and negotiating skills, and importantly, life coaching principles to help people dispel imposter phenomenon, lack of confidence, and self-doubt. By background, I'm a pediatric endocrinologist. I've now been in the biotech and pharma industry for 17 years. I started in medical affairs, and the company I was at was a rather large pharmaceutical company. Over time, I've transitioned more and more into smaller biotech companies, and I've held roles in both medical affairs as well as clinical development, ultimately leading to becoming a chief medical officer of now my third biotech company, where I have responsibility for medical affairs, clinical development, regulatory, patient advocacy, and pharmacovigilance. So I really hope that I'm able to speak to all of you related to all of the different roles that are available to physicians in the pharmaceutical industry. I like to start with this statistic, but I think it's very important for physicians to understand it's okay that you don't know much about the pharmaceutical industry. We don't learn much about it in residency or fellowship. You may not know any physicians, now you know me, that work in the pharmaceutical industry. And the statistic is that about only 1% or less of all physicians work in the pharmaceutical industry. So no surprise again that you may not understand this as a career opportunity. But hopefully after leaving today, you'll have a really good sense of the opportunities you might have. So I also like to compare and contrast. And everyone's situation is different. I completely understand that. So please forgive any generalities that maybe don't completely apply to you. But thinking about it generally, on the clinical side, the physician has a lot of decision-making power. They're involved in individual patient care typically. The cross-functional teamwork, which certainly they do, typically consists of working with other healthcare professionals, whether it's nurses, physical therapists, for example. The day is highly structured, so you have appointments that start at a certain time and end at a certain time. You don't have a lot of flexibility typically in your day. Key indicators of success might be grants or publications if you're in an academic institution, and RVUs, of course, if you're more involved in day-to-day patient care. Funding pressures certainly may be high. On the biopharma side, and I should say, I'm going to use biotech, pharma, and biopharma interchangeably throughout. There's really not as much of a differentiation now between pharma companies and biotech companies, and so I will use those interchangeably. In biopharma, the physician is actually unlikely to be the ultimate decision maker. We do many things in group decision making. We are still caring for patients, and I'm very passionate about this part. I'm not caring for patients on a day-by-day basis, but I'm caring for patients by helping to bring important drugs to be able to impact their overall health and well-being. Cross-functional teamwork includes many from very highly varied functions. So we might be on a team with business development, with commercial colleagues, marketing colleagues, finance colleagues. So it's a much different environment of the types of people you're working with. We have less structure to our day. So yes, I have lots of meetings on my calendar, but I also have flexibility in if I need to schedule a physician appointment. I typically can manage that by moving some things around, whereas noting that colleagues that have schedules, it's very difficult to move patients. So less structure, a little more flexibility. Key indicators of success really vary with your function and your seniority. So my key indicators, I am negotiating those with my manager, and the people I manage are negotiating their key indicators with me. So we set our goals at the beginning of the year, and we know what we're mapping to achieve to be considered successful in our role. I say no funding pressures. I guess there's have to be careful about using the word no or never, but much, much fewer funding pressures. One example I use for people is many of you that might go to academic conferences. You're negotiating with your colleagues who can go to those conferences because people need to stay back and cover. For the biopharma industry, we often are able to send a number of people, and there's that ability to go to numerous congresses and conferences every year. So just an example of the differences between clinical and biopharma. So there are three major roles that I talk about for physicians in the biopharma industry. Pharmacovigilance, and at some companies that's called drug safety, and at other companies called patient safety, but really one and the same. So if you see those terms, they typically are interchangeable. Clinical development, and we'll talk a little bit about two different roles in clinical development, the clinical scientist and the clinical development physician. And in medical affairs, the medical science liaison, and then the medical affairs physician, which for clinical development physicians and medical affairs physicians, typically most people are entering industry at either the associate or director level. And then there's room for progression into senior director, executive director, vice president. So there is room for continued advancement in those roles. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Now, certainly it's worth me saying that once a physician gets into the industry, it opens up all kinds of possibilities. So for example, I know physicians that are CEOs of companies. I know physicians who now are part of business development organizations. That's not the typical entry route, but once you get in, the possibilities really open up for career development and advancement. So let's talk a bit about each of these different areas. And we'll start with clinical development. I think clinical development for most people is pretty intuitive. Clinical development involves all aspects of studying an investigational drug product in human trials. So we talk about early phase trials, meaning phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is usually safety. Phase 2 is continued safety and also some proof of concept efficacy. And late phase trials, phase 3, phase 4. Phase 3 are the typical trials that are efficacy trials, obviously still monitoring safety, but those efficacy endpoints are ultimately what typically lead to the ability to take a drug for regulatory approval. And then phase 4 is typically a post-marketing study. So the drug's now approved, but maybe we're running an ongoing registry, we're collecting ongoing open label extension data. So those are considered late phase. Now, in that, clinical development physicians are highly engaged in writing clinical protocols, writing other clinical documents. There's an important document called the investigator brochure that the clinical development team owns and is highly engaged in crafting and strategically building out those documents. Pharmacovigilance or drug safety. Again, for most people, relatively intuitive. It's all about the safety of a drug. And so here, the physician is fully focused on safety signals. So they're not really engaged in what is the efficacy of the drug, like the clinical development physician. They are really in charge of understanding the safety from all aspects. So in the pharma industry, I think many of you know, we have to generate non-clinical or preclinical data, safety data in animals before we move into humans, typically. So the pharmacovigilance physician has to understand that animal safety data and how that might translate into humans. And ultimately, as we start deriving human safety data, they're then looking for safety signals. An example might be, maybe we're starting to see increased liver functions, and we need to investigate why that is. Investigate, is that happening in a subset of patients? So the pharmacovigilance physician is really using all of their clinical knowledge to understand what is the disease and what are the side effects of the disease, if you will, and what are the side effects of the drug, and helping to tease that apart. They're also involved in lots of clinical documents, lots of regulatory documents. In pharma, we have to do a lot of safety reporting to regulatory agencies like the FDA, the EMA in Europe, PMDA in Japan. Those are the regulatory agencies. So again, involvement in lots of documentation of safety data. And then there's medical affairs. So medical affairs, personally, I find to be the most nebulous for most people to understand. And even when I started in pharma, I had a hard time explaining to people what I really did. So the definition for medical affairs, this is the external scientific and medical arm that takes clinical medical information from the company to external stakeholders, such as key opinion leaders, physicians, and patient groups. They're also bringing back information from those people into the company. And so the word scientific exchange or clinical exchange gets used a lot to describe medical affairs. Importantly, you might think medical affairs is only focused on drugs that are approved. In fact, the medical affairs organizations are moving earlier and earlier to have more and more impact on how a drug is actually developed. So again, taking some of that scientific knowledge from a key opinion leader, from an important physician in a certain area, and incorporating that into clinical design, for example, is an important piece of the medical affairs organization. So they really do work across sort of phase 3 to phase 4, and then once a drug is out on the market as well. So I'd like to talk about what are some keys to a successful transition. You do need a professional resume. Many of you have an academic CV that is a list, and sometimes for academic physicians, a long list, many pages of all of the things you've accomplished. And that's wonderful. But what we have to do is take that list and translate it into what have you achieved. So an example of that might be on a CV, you might say, head of therapeutics committee. Great. On a resume, what we're going to be doing is talking about what did you actually do as the head of the therapeutics committee? What did you achieve? What did you accomplish for patients, for the hospital system, for the clinical system? So that's the importance of the resume and the difference in a CV and a resume. Understanding how to decipher job descriptions. Many of you may have been on LinkedIn. That's my favorite place to look. Indeed is another place, but I really think LinkedIn for biopharma is the place to go. You may have looked at a job description on LinkedIn and immediately been turned off by something like, you need 3 to 5 years in the biotech industry to apply for this job. Well, being able to decipher that and understand that that's actually aspirational. They'd love to find someone that already has experience, but we know we always all have to have that first job to gain the experience. And certainly there are plenty of physicians out there that are doing that. So being able to really understand the job description, understand what the wording means, and whether or not it's something appropriate to spend your time on applying. Knowing where to look for open positions. So I've sort of given you my secret. LinkedIn is the place. That's where the biotech and pharma recruiters hang out. That's where the companies hang out. So LinkedIn is really the place that I suggest to people. Networking. Networking is critical in this industry. If you can get your resume in front of a warm body instead of submitting it through a computer system alone, that gets you ahead, puts your resume at the top of the pile. So networking is really important. Interview preparation. Many of us have been through interviews, certainly. You've interviewed for medical school or you've interviewed for a clinical role. The preparation for a biopharma interview is a little different, and helping to understand what to expect, how to show up, what people are maybe stereotyping physicians as or thinking about physicians, and how you can really present yourself in the best light and show all of the experience as a physician you bring to the table. Understand what the company is looking for. Negotiate a fair compensation package. Really, really important. Always negotiate. And that's not just for biopharma, always negotiate. And then knowing what to expect in your first few days, first few weeks, and ultimately, again, this career progression that I mentioned and the opportunities that you can have in biopharma. I mentioned at the beginning that I incorporate life coaching skills into not only the sort of step-by-step, but how do we help get people over limiting beliefs? Some of the limiting beliefs that I hear from clients include, I'm not qualified, I'm an introvert, I don't have clinical trial experience, I need additional training and certification, I don't want to be a sales rep. That is not what we are talking about working in pharma. There are specific roles that we need qualified physicians for. And then finally, I don't have business experience. All of these are limiting beliefs. So if I really go through your resume and start to think about with you, what are the qualifications you bring? Not what are you missing, but what do you bring, and how do we position you with the interviewers, with the hiring managers to help you shine and help you show all the skills you have? By the way, you're physicians and you have lots and lots of training and schooling, and so you bring a lot to the table. And I really want to help people work through these beliefs so that they show up as their best selves every time they're interacting with someone in the biopharma industry. Okay, I wanted to make sure I left plenty of time for questions. In past experiences, there usually are a number of questions. So I'll pause here and turn it back to Donna, and we can go through any questions that the audience has.
Sure. So, Dr. Craer, we usually go all the way through because it's a recording and then take them at the end so that we don't have to like edit the recording. At this point, we will need to, but if you could just continue, if this is not the end, I would appreciate it doing it at the end.
Certainly, yeah. So actually, I am really at the end of the slides. This is some information on the Industry MD Coach.
Okay.
offerings for one-on-one coaching and an online course.
Okay.
But I just felt like people typically like the question and answer opportunities. So
Okay. Okay. So,
honestly,
okay.
plenty
So
of time.
I am going to remove you as a pin. And again, maybe we'll make this as not the typical lectures because we do like to curate and make everything the same. It's usually an hour, no worries. We do have a question actually. So let me stop the recording.